The locker room was quiet, too quiet, except for the sound of our breathing is slightly heavier than mine. Matt stood a few feet away, toweling off his hair, his bare chest glistening with sweat. My heart was pounding, not from the game we just finished, but from the way he looked at me just then, like he'd been waiting for me to say something I hadn't even realized I'd been holding back. "Alex," he said, his voice low, breaking the silence. "We need to talk." I froze, the damp towel in my hand suddenly feeling heavy. "Yeah," I managed to choke out. He took a step closer, and I could feel the warmth of him even though he wasn't touching me. "I've been thinking," he started, his eyes searching mine, "about us." My stomach dropped. There it was, the thing I'd been avoiding for weeks now. The thing that had been gnawing at the edges of my thoughts every time we hung out, every time we laughed, every time our hands brushed against each other. I wanted to run, to laugh it off, to pretend like I didn't know what he was about to say. But I couldn't. Not this time. "Matt," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know." His eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then he closed the distance between us, his hand reaching out to graze against my arm. "So, what do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling with something I couldn't quite place. Hope, maybe, or fear. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that the line between us, the one I'd always thought was uncrossable, was gone. And suddenly, the only thing that mattered was the way his fingers felt against my skin, the way his breath hitched when I leaned in just a little closer. We'd been best friends since we were kids, Matt and I. The kind of friends who knew each other inside and out, who could finish each other's sentences, who could sit in comfortable silence for hours without it being awkward. We'd been through everything together, failed math tests, family drama, heartbreaks, and we'd always come out the other side stronger. But lately, something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface of every conversation, every shared glance. It started with the small things. The way he'd linger a little too long when we hugged. The way he'd catch my eye across the room during practice and smile like we shared a secret. The way my stomach would flip whenever he leaned in close to whisper something in my ear. And then there were the dreams, fragments of moments that felt too real, too intimate, that left me waking up breathless and confused. I didn't know what it meant, and I was too scared to ask. Because what if I was imagining it? What if I was reading into things that weren't there? What if I ruined everything by bringing it up? But now, standing here in the locker room with him so close I could feel the heat of his body, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension between us was palpable, like a live wire waiting to spark. "Alex," he said again, his voice softer this time. I think I might feel something. For you." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was look at him, my heart thundering in my chest, hoping he could see everything I was too scared to say. "Me too," I finally whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and freeing. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, slowly, tentatively, he reached up and brushed his fingers against my cheek. The touch was so gentle, so unexpected, that it sent a shiver down my spine. I leaned into it, closing my eyes, savoring the feel of his skin against mine. "I've wanted to do this for so long," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of my pulse roaring in my ears. I opened my eyes to find him looking at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "So why didn't you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I was scared," he admitted, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate path along my jawline. "Scared of losing you. Scared of messing everything up." "Me too," I admitted, my breath hitching as he leaned in closer. His lips brushed against mine. So softly, it was almost a question, a silent plea for permission. And in that moment, all my fears, all my doubts, seemed to melt away. I kissed him back, letting myself fall into the warmth of him, the safety of him. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a confession, a leap of faith. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice shaky. I didn't have an answer, but for the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared. Because whatever happened next, we'd face it together. The locker room was empty now, but the air still felt charged, like the echo of our confession lingered in every corner. I stared at Matt, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His eyes were searching mine, wide and uncertain, and for a moment, I wondered if he was as scared as I was. But then he smiled, that same crooked grin I'd known forever, and it settled something deep inside me. "So," he said, his voice low but steady, "we're really doing this." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I guess we are." He nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. His skin still glistened from practice, and I couldn't help but notice the way his muscles shifted under his t-shirt. I'd seen him like this 1,000 times, but now it felt different. Now I felt it. Every glance, every touch, every word between us carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "We don't have to tell anyone yet," he said, his tone cautious but firm. "We can just figure it out. Us, no one else." I wanted to agree, to let myself hide in the safety of this moment. But the fear crept in, whispering all the things that could go wrong. What if people find out? What if they don't accept us? What if we ruin everything? "Alex," Matt said softly, stepping closer. His hand brushed against mine, sending a shiver up my arm. "Talk to me." "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said, his confidence unwavering. "Not now, not ever." His words should have been enough to calm me, but they only made the storm inside me rage harder. How could he be so sure? How could he be so okay with this? I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something huge, and one wrong step could send me spiraling. "Hey," he said, his voice firmer now. He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to look at him. "I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, we're in this together." "Okay," I nodded, even though the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. His thumbs brushed against my cheeks, gentle but insistent, and I leaned into his touch. It was grounding, real, something I could hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. "Okay," I whispered. He smiled again, that same crooked grin that made my chest tighten. "Good. Now, let's get out of here before someone walks in." We grabbed our bags and headed out of the locker room, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a new kind of quiet, one that carried the weight of everything we'd just confessed. As we walked down the empty hallway, I couldn't help but glance at him out of the corner of my eye. He looked the same as always, tall, confident, mad. But there was something different in the way he carried himself. Something lighter, freer, like a part of him had finally been set loose. "What?" he asked, catching me staring. I shook my head, feeling my face heat up. "Nothing. Just thinking." He smirked, nudging me with his elbow. "About me, I hope." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop the smile that tugged at my lips. "Don't let it go to your head." We reached the parking lot, and I hesitated, unsure of what came next. Do we go our separate ways? Do we keep pretending everything's normal? Do we lean into this thing between us and see where it takes us? "Give me your keys," Matt said, holding out his hand. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I'm driving," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Since when do you drive my car?" I asked, even as I handed him the keys. "Since now," he said, grinning. "Get in." I didn't argue. I climbed into the passenger seat, and he slid behind the wheel like he owned the place. He started the engine, and the familiar hum of the car filled the silence. For a moment, it felt like any other day, like nothing had changed. But then he reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and my heart skipped a beat. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. He glanced at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Somewhere we can talk." We drove in silence, the world outside passing by in a blur. I focused on the feel of his hand in mine, the warmth of his skin against my own. It was strange, but it felt right, like something I'd been missing without even realizing it. He pulled into a park on the outskirts of town, a place we'd gone countless times as kids. It was deserted now, the sun dipping low in the sky and casting long shadows across the grass. He parked the car and turned to me, his expression serious. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I hesitated, chewing on my bottom lip. How do you put something like this into words? How do you explain the way your entire world has shifted in a matter of hours? "Everything," I finally said. "I don't know how to do this, Matt. I don't know how to beat this." "What? Happy?" he teased, his tone light but his eyes searching. I huffed out a laugh, even though my chest felt tight. "Yeah, I guess. You'll figure it out," he said, his confidence unwavering. "We'll figure it out. Together." His words should have been comforting, but they only made the fear inside me grow. Because what if we didn't? What if this thing between us was too much too soon? What if it destroyed everything we built? "Alex," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Stop overthinking. Just be here. With me." I nodded, even though my mind was still racing. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch so soft it made my breath catch. "You're not alone in this," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. But the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind, whispering all the things that could go wrong. "Matt," I started, my voice trembling. "What if you?" "No," he interrupted, his tone firm. "No, what ifs? Just us. Right here, right now." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me, slow and deliberate, like he was trying to silence all the doubts in my mind. And for a moment, it worked. For a moment, all I could think about was the feel of his lips against mine, the warmth of his body so close to mine, the way my heart seemed to beat in time with his. When he pulled away, I felt breathless, dizzy, like the world had tilted on its axis. "We'll figure it out," he repeated, his voice steady. "Together." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Together. I could do that. I could do this. But as we sat there in the fading light, the weight of everything we were about to face settled over me like a heavy blanket. Together or not, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual as I walked into school. Matt was already at his locker, leaning casually against it like nothing had changed. But everything had. The way his eyes met mine, the slight tilt of his lips, it was all different now. Subtle, but undeniably there. "Morning," he said, his voice low and warm, like he was sharing a secret. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I tucked my books into my bag, fumbling with the zipper. I could feel his gaze on me, and it made my skin prickle with something I couldn't quite name. "Practice after school?" he asked, as if it were a normal question. But it wasn't. Practice meant being alone together in the locker room, and that thought sent a jolt through me. "Yeah," I managed, nodding. "Practice." He smirked, and I couldn't tell if it was because he knew exactly what I was thinking or if it was just his usual confidence. Either way, it made me feel exposed, like he could see right through me. The day dragged on, each minute stretching longer than the last. In class, I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the park, to the way his lips had felt against mine. To the way he'd said, "We'll figure it out. Together." But the more I thought about it, the more the fear crept in. What if we couldn't figure it out? What if figuring it out meant losing everything? By the time the final bell rang, my nerves were frayed. I made my way to the gym, my stomach in knots. Matt was already there, stretching on the court. He looked up as I walked in, and his grin was enough to make my heart skip a beat. "Ready to get your ass kicked?" he teased, tossing a basketball my way. I caught it, forcing a laugh. "You wish." But as we started playing, the tension between us was palpable. Every brush of our arms, every time our eyes locked, it was like the air was charged with electricity. I tried to focus on the game, but my mind kept wandering. What if this was our last normal practice? What if this was the last time things felt simple? When coach finally blew the whistle, signaling the end of practice, I felt both relieved and anxious. We filed into the locker room, the chatter of our teammates filling the space. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with Matt as I grabbed my towel and headed for the showers. But as the others started to leave, lingering in the hallway or heading out to their cars, Matt lingered too. I could feel his presence behind me, even before he spoke. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but steady. I turned to face him, my towel clenched in my hands. "Hey." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Then, without warning, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. My breath hitched, and I looked up at him, my heart pounding. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes searching mine. "About us." "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I don't want to hide," he said, his tone firm. "Not from you. Not from anyone." My chest tightened. "But what if? What if it's too much? What if we—" He cut me off, his hand closing around mine. "I'm not saying we have to shout it from the rooftops. Just, I don't want to pretend like nothing's changed. Because it has, Alex. And I don't want to go back." I stared at him, his words sinking in. He was right, things had changed. But was I ready for everyone else to know? Was I ready to face the whispers, the stares, the questions? Before I could answer, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both soft and sure. It was over almost as quickly as it began, but it left me breathless. "Whatever happens," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine, "we'll figure it out. Together." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. Together. It was a promise, a lifeline. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. Maybe we could figure it out. Maybe we could face whatever came next. But as we pulled away, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made my heart leap into my throat. "Alex, Matt, you guys coming?" One of our teammates called, his voice echoing off the locker room walls. Matt stepped back, his expression calm but determined. "Yeah, we're coming," he called back, his eyes never leaving mine. As we walked out of the locker room, side by side, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into uncharted territory. But with Matt beside me, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance, every brush of our hands, every moment we shared carried the weight of something unspoken. It wasn't just us anymore, it was the world around us, watching, judging, waiting for us to slip. But Matt was steady. His confidence never wavered, even when mine threatened to crumble. We were careful. At school, we kept our distance. No lingering touches, no meaningful looks. Just two teammates, two friends, nothing more. But the moment the final bell rang, the mask slipped. We'd meet at his car, and for a few precious minutes, it was just us. The world outside didn't exist. You think anyone knows? I asked one afternoon, my voice barely above a whisper as we sat in his car, parked in an empty lot behind the school. Matt turned to me, his eyes soft but unwavering. Does it matter? Yes, I said, my chest tightening. No, I don't know. I don't want things to change. They already have, he said, reaching for my hand. His fingers interlaced with mine, warm and sure. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing, Alex. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. What if someone saw us? What if they talked? What if everything we'd built, our friendship, our bond, came crashing down? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was after practice, the locker room buzzing with the usual chaos. Towels snapped, voices echoed, and the air was thick with sweat and the sharp scent of cheap deodorant. I was at my locker, pretending to focus on lacing up my shoes, when I heard it. Yo, Matt, one of our teammates called, his voice loud enough to turn heads. You and Alex been spending a lot of time together lately. What's up with that? My heart stopped. My fingers froze on the laces, and I could feel the color draining from my face. I didn't dare look up, but I could feel Matt's presence just a few feet away, calm and collected as always. What's up with you, man? Matt shot back, his tone light, but edged with something sharper. Jealous. The locker room erupted in laughter, and I forced myself to breathe. It's fine. It's just a joke. No one knows. But the tightness in my chest didn't ease. Nah, man, just saying. The teammate continued, oblivious to the tension he'd stirred. You two are like, I don't know, joined at the hip or something. Yeah, well, maybe I just like his company, Matt said. And this time, his voice carried a hint of something else, something that made my stomach flip. I risked a glance in his direction, and our eyes met. There was a challenge in his gaze, a quiet defiance that sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't hiding. Not from me, not from them. And for a moment, I felt a surge of something. Courage, maybe. Or maybe just the desperate need to be as brave as he was. But then the moment passed, and reality came crashing back. The locker room was still loud, still chaotic, but I felt painfully exposed. What if they're right? What if they figure it out? The thought was enough to make me want to bolt, to disappear before anyone could put the pieces together. Matt must have sensed it because he was suddenly beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. You good? He asked, his voice low, just for me. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Come on, let's get out of here. We left together, as always, but the weight of what had happened, what had almost happened, hung heavy in the air. We didn't talk about it, not right away. Instead, we drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound between us. It wasn't until we were parked at the park, our usual spot, that Matt finally spoke. You're scared, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I stared out the window, watching the trees sway in the evening breeze. Aren't you? Yeah, he admitted. But not enough to let it change what we have. What if it's not up to us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What if they find out, Matt? What if they won't? He interrupted, his hand finding mine again. And even if they do, we'll handle it. Together. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could face whatever came our way, that our bond was strong enough to withstand anything. But the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, whispering doubts I couldn't silence. Alex, he said, his voice pulling me back. Look at me. I turned to him, and what I saw in his eyes took my breath away. It wasn't just determination. It was something deeper, something raw and real. I'm not going anywhere, he said, his voice steady. No matter what happens, I'm here. With you. And for the first time, I let myself believe him. Not just with my head, but with my heart. Because in that moment, I realized something. I'd rather risk losing everything than lose him. Our lips met, tentative at first, then with a hunger that left us both breathless. It was different this time. Not just passion, but a promise. A silent vow that no matter what came next, we'd face it together. But then, as always, reality came crashing back. The sound of a car passing by made us pull apart, our hearts racing. We were still in the park, still exposed, still one wrong move away from everything falling apart. We need to be careful, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. I know, Matt replied, his hand tightening around mine. But we can't let fear control us, Alex. We can't let it take this away. I nodded, but the fear was still there, clinging to me like a shadow. And as we drove back to school, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. The next morning, I walked into school with a knot in my stomach. Every glance, every whisper, felt like a test, when I wasn't sure I could pass. And then I saw him. Matt was at his locker, as always, but this time, he wasn't alone. A group of our teammates were gathered around him, their voices loud and boisterous. My heart raced as I approached, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. But then Matt looked up, and our eyes met. There was a look in his gaze, one that made my breath catch. It wasn't fear or hesitation. It was something else entirely. "Alex," he called, his voice carrying across the hallway. "Get over here." I hesitated, my feet rooted to the floor. But then he smiled, and something inside me shifted. He wasn't hiding. Not from them. Not from anyone. And if he could be brave, then maybe I could too. I walked over, my heart pounding with every step. The group parted as I approached, their eyes curious but not unkind. And then Matt did something I wasn't expecting. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and pulled me close. "Guys," he said, his voice steady, "there's something you should know." The hallway seemed to freeze around us, the chatter of students fading into a distant hum. My hand was still wrapped in Matt's, warm and firm, a lifeline anchoring me to the moment. I could feel the weight of their stares, our teammates, our classmates, like a spotlight I couldn't escape. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, but Matt's grip never wavered. "Guys," he began again, his voice calm, almost casual, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Alex and I, we're together. Like, together. There it was, out in the open. The words hung in the air, sharp and unmovable, and for a moment, no one spoke. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure everyone could hear it. I glanced at Matt, searching his face for reassurance, and found it there in the steadiness of his eyes. He wasn't scared. He wasn't backing down. "Wait, what?" The voice belonged to Chris, one of our loudest teammates, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You're, like, dating?" Matt nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, we are." The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until Chris broke it with a laugh, a loud, booming sound that echoed down the hallway. "Dude, seriously? I mean, I knew you guys were close, but damn. Okay, whatever makes you happy, man." Relief washed over me in a wave so intense I almost swayed on my feet. But before I could fully process it, another voice chimed in, this one softer, more hesitant. "So, like, is this why you've been acting all weird lately?" It was Jake, his arms crossed, his tone more curious than accusatory. Matt shrugged, his fingers tightening around mine. "Yeah, maybe. We just didn't want to make a big deal out of it." "But it is a big deal," Jake said, stepping closer. "I mean, you're our teammates, our friends. If this is who you are, then we've got your back, right?" There were murmurs of agreement, nods, and a few half-smiles. It wasn't the overwhelming support I'd secretly hoped for, but it wasn't rejection either. It was acceptance, tentative, unsure, but real. "Thanks, man," Matt said, his voice softer now, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "It means a lot." As the group began to disperse, the initial shock giving way to quiet conversations, Matt turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. I nodded, though my mind was still reeling. "I think so. That was a lot." "Yeah," he agreed, his lips quirking into a small smile. "But we did it. It's out there now." "Yeah," I echoed, the reality of it sinking in. We were out, not just to ourselves, but to the world, or at least our corner of it. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur. People looked at us differently, some with curiosity, others with a kind of wary respect. A few whispered as we walked by, but no one said anything outright. It was as if the hallway had collectively decided to let us be, at least for now. After school, we found ourselves back in the locker room, the familiar scent of sweat and damp towels wrapping around us. The tension from earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet ease that felt almost surreal. Matt leaned against the row of lockers, his arms crossed, watching me with that same steady gaze. "So," he said, breaking the silence. "How does it feel?" "Weird," I admitted, sitting down on the bench. "But good too. Like a weight's been lifted, you know?" He nodded, pushing off the lockers and coming to sit beside me. "Yeah, I get that." For a moment, we just sat there, the sound of our breathing filling the space between us. Then, without warning, Matt reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek. The touch was so gentle, so tender, it made my breath catch. "You were amazing today," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know that, right?" I swallowed, my heart hammering in my chest. "I didn't do anything. You're the one who—" "No," he interrupted, his hand still on my cheek. "You did everything. You stood there with me, even though you were scared. That's not easy." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, raw and honest, and so matte that it made my throat tighten. "I just didn't want to lose you," I admitted, my voice cracking. "You're not going to lose me," he said, his tone fierce now, his eyes locking on mine. "Not ever. I meant what I said, Alex. I'm not hiding anymore. Not from them, not from anyone. And I'm not going to let you hide either." Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft but unyielding, a promise and a declaration all at once. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into it, into him, until the world outside the locker room ceased to exist. When he pulled away, his forehead resting against mine, I felt the faintest tremor in his hands. "You're not alone in this," he whispered. "We're in it together." Okay. I breathed, the word barely audible. But as we sat there, the reality of what we'd done began to creep back in. The whispers in the hallway, the curious stares, the questions we didn't have answers to. What would our parents say? Our teachers? The rest of the team? The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but for now, it didn't matter. For now, we were together, and that was enough. The sound of footsteps outside the locker room jolted us apart, and Matt shot me a quick, reassuring smile before standing up. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm. "One step at a time." I nodded, standing too, though my legs still felt shaky. One step at a time. As we walked out of the locker room, side by side, the weight of the day settled over me like a blanket, heavy but comforting. We'd crossed a line today, one we couldn't uncross, and the path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it, ready to face us. And when Matt reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, I knew he felt it too.